All right, we are live. So, JR, you actually wanted to talk to me had questions about my morality and my epistemology. And so I'd be happy to talk with you. I've seen you talk on Skylar's channel a few times. You're a nice guy, interesting to listen to, interesting questions. So go for it. What questions did you have?
Yeah, well, I was hoping, I'm a big fan. I think I might agree with you. I think your position is that based on your epistemology, there is no evidence for God. And I think you might be right. I think based on your epistemology, you may have ruled out all evidence for God. So I'm not an apologist. I'm not here to make arguments for God's existence. I'm more, like to poke around and understand where people are coming from. I'm more interested in good faith conversations. So I'm going to ask questions that I am genuinely interested in how you will answer them. So
cool.
But maybe there are some things in your epistemology that I don't understand, and maybe they're dumb questions, but I'm like, why haven't I heard people asking these? So maybe we could just walk through your epistemology and I can ask some questions about it as we go.
Sure. Give you the short version. So it starts with, I think, therefore I am. That's the basis of all knowledge. The first thing you can really know. And then we go, there is some difference between my imagination and my experience. So if I imagine a unicorn, I don't have the experience of seeing a unicorn in front of me. So there's some difference between these two things. And we need some kind of methodology to differentiate between them. Now, for a long set of reasons that I have a 15-minute video about, it's on Fallen Cups and Devious Fairies, the allegory of the scientific method. I go through what those reasons are that I choose the methodology of science, but I go with the methodology of science to differentiate between my experience and my imagination. And so whatever science deems to be of the experiential, I call that the external world. There are things of the external world, and whatever science deems to be of my imagination, I call that the internal world, or the conceptual things. And so I have a distinction between the conceptual and the empirical, the stuff in our head and the stuff in the world. So any questions so far?
Yes. So you would say Descartes, I think, therefore I am, is like the absolute starting point in your epistemology?
Yes.
Nothing like presupposed before that?
Nope.
Okay. Well, and so this might be a stupid question because you know much more about philosophy than I do, but doesn't Descartes require the law of identity?
No, he completely rejects the law of identity, all logic and all math. That was, in fact, the point of his evil demon or evil deceiver argument, where he said that we can reject, or we can doubt logic and we can doubt math because everything in our minds could be implanted in us by some evil deceiver who is giving us false impressions of the ideas of logic and math. So those could be wrong. But what can't be wrong is that I have experience. Even if everything about my experience is wrong, I still must have experience.
Okay. Okay. I'm good with that. And then you're saying, yeah, because I think this is going to get into an area of philosophy that's probably where I'm out of my depth. But I think I like the way you use Descartes. So I'll keep rolling forward with it. Then you say there's some distinction between what goes on inside your mind and outside. How do you know there's a distinction if you've only got Descartes at that point?
Well, I can't tell that there is an outside and there is an inside. All I can tell is that there is some difference between what I call my imagination and what I call my experience. Now, those could just be deeper levels of imagination. Like maybe the external world is just some deeper level of my mind that I just don't have as much control over as I do my imagination. Maybe we're in the Matrix and the world we experience outside of us is just a bunch of ones and zeros. Maybe I'm a Boltzmann brain and it's just different levels of composite conceptual frameworks. But none of that matters to my epistemology, because the only thing I'm saying is that there is some difference between my imagination and my experience. I don't know what this difference is. It's ontology invariant. So it doesn't matter what the difference is. All I can say is that there is a difference, and we need some methodology to define what that difference is. Does that make sense?
Yes, and you know there's a difference just because of experience. It's not based on anything else?
Right, because when I imagine a unicorn, I do not have the experience of seeing a unicorn, so there must necessarily be some difference, even though I don't know what it is.
Right, so just I'm having these experiences. I have different. It seems like I have different kinds of experiences. What I see with my eyes, the quality of experience of seeing something with my eyes, and the quality of experience of seeing something in my brain are different.
Right. So like if I tried to knock over the cup I see in front of me with my imagination and try and visualize things, it'll never knock over the cup as far as I can tell. So there's got to be some difference between the qualitative difference between these two different categories of what's going on here.
Okay. Got it. And the 15-minute video on falling cups and fairies is one of the ones I haven't seen from you. So maybe it's not worth it to make you rehash all of it, but could you give me maybe the breadcrumb version of like I'm fine with science as your methodology. That makes sense to me. What I'm not clear on is how you get from experience to some of these steps without any presuppositions. That's the confusing part for me. Because not making sense.
Well, it is. It's just hard to try and filter the entire philosophy of science in a short time. So there's some difference between my imagination and my experience, and we need some way to tell the difference between the two. And we can know whatever method we're using doesn't work if it can't differentiate between the two, then the method doesn't work. And so there are different ways to test to see if it can tell the difference. Like essentially it goes down to novel testable predictions. Like if you can make novel testable future predictions, that methodology can tell the difference. Now, just explaining things that you have in the past can't tell the difference, because you can always explain anything in the past with any of the different imaginary explanations. Like if I saw a cup fall over, what caused the cup to fall over? Well, maybe it was a mouse, maybe it was a bird, a squirrel, aliens, UFOs, magic powers, a god, ghosts. You could just explain it with anything. So just the ability to explain the fact that the cup knocked over, explaining past events, does not differentiate between your imagination and your experience. And explaining present events also doesn't. So just being able to explain everything we have seen and we are seeing isn't good enough. But the one thing that can differentiate would be future predictions. Because if you can say, if my explanation is correct, I can predict to see this thing in the future, which we haven't discovered yet, that gives us a much better, and we actually discovered, if we verify that that thing is in fact there, that gives us a much better reason to believe that this is not just an imaginary thing, because it can filter out between those two.
Yeah, I think I'm good with all of that. The part though, like, as soon as you get to novel testable predictions, as soon as we go there, though, we've got principles of logic, uniformity of nature. We've got all those things. So at some point, those things have to come in. So like that's the part where I'm like, I'm not sure where do you get those? Like
well, those are just descriptions of the fact. So I start with I think, therefore I am, and logic is simply just a description of that fact. So reality is the way reality is, and the logic describes reality. So I don't start with logic. I just use logic to describe the things that I'm experiencing, or that I am experiencing. So it's not a presupposition. It's simply just a descriptive language to describe the experience I have and can't not have.
Interesting. Well, so yeah, and I saw that. I think you got into this a little bit with Rasmussen, and it was where I got lost in that conversation. I can understand like saying those are descriptions like of my experience. It seems like you have to make an assumption that those descriptions will continue to work, though.
No, I can just say they do seem to work as far as I can tell. I mean, I can say they could be false as far as I know. It's just a methodological application. So since I'm not actually saying that they are in fact true, I don't have to care if they continue to be true. It's like saying if I see a water bottle and I pick it up, the water bottle may not exist. We could be in the Matrix, but I don't actually care, because all I care about is the water going to make my thirst go away? And so if I can say that the water will make my thirst go away, and I can test that and show it, even if it may not be true 10 seconds from now, it's still good reason to believe it's true now, and it's good reason to believe it's true for the next second or so. So the fact I don't have to assume it's going to be true forever. I can just say it works, and as long as it works, I don't care.
Okay, so that makes total sense. So it is an assumption, but it's a practical one.
Right. I'm not actually assuming it's going to be true forever. I don't care. That question is independent of my epistemology.
Okay, well now you lost me again, because it seems like in order to say future testable predictions, that is you've got to make those practical assumptions, you've got to put them into the future.
Right. I don't assume it's going to be true forever. So I have reason to believe it's true now. I have reason to believe it's true so far as I can tell in the past. So I have reason to believe it's going to continue to be true as far as I can tell, but I'm not going to assume it is universal.
Got it. And so for you, that's the distinction between a presupposition and kind of these practical assumptions that it has worked, it seems to be working, we'll go with it.
Right. So I'm not saying logic is universal. It applies everywhere to all possible worlds. It's just a description as so far as we can tell. There could be a universe where A does not equal A. The fact that I can't imagine it doesn't mean I can rule it out. So I don't absolutely grant those. I don't presuppose them. They're purely pragmatic descriptions of the reality that I can experience and interact with.
Yeah. Well, and I'm with you. I think that's probably how most people subconsciously to me that still seems like a presupposition, but I understand like why you don't want to give that away, so to speak.
Yeah, there's a subtle difference. One is absolute and applies universally, and one is tentative and applies only to specific contexts.
Okay, this makes sense, because I've seen people like freak out whenever you say this, and I'm like, well, why don't they just ask him what he is talking about? So I appreciate that. Well, okay, so from there, then you've got the three levels of evidence, which I had some questions about too.
So I've just made the distinction between the conceptual and empirical. Those are the first two, and then there's another one, which is the metaphysical, and that's the absolute fundamental first principles of reality that are just absolutely true, and there's no more truth to discover beyond them.
Yes. Okay. And this is partly like the definition of metaphysical, like that makes sense to me, but it's not, I don't know if most of the time I hear people use the word metaphysical, if that's the definition they're using, but in your epistemology, is there anything that is metaphysical evidence?
Just the experience of my existence. That's the only thing that would qualify.
That's the Descartes is the only thing that, and could you tease out for me why Descartes qualifies?
Because it can't not be true. Like I can't believe I exist and be wrong. Because if I believed I exist and didn't exist, then I couldn't have the belief in the first place.
Got it. And so, yeah, so that's kind of the one brute thing that you have is Descartes. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, cool. Well, I wanted to ask you then some practical implications about this epistemology, because I think for most of human history, this epistemology would not have been available to people. Is that because the empirical basis for things, for most of human history, there was such a narrow empirical basis for things and such a narrow access to information?
Well, what do you mean? Because we've always had experience, and we can always do testable predictions on the experience. We've had that at least since like Socrates and Plato.
Sure.
So most of human history, you mean like since the beginning of humanity 200,000 years ago, when we barely had like any kind of recognition of reality? Yes, we would not have had it back then. We would not have been able to do the logical, intellectual processing to come to this epistemology at that point, or pretty much anything else.
Okay, yeah. I'm just trying to imagine how this would work backwards through time, because like you use the example of like, if somebody comes and tells me like I saw a dog walking down the street, completely reasonable to believe because we have this empirical basis for dogs. But it seems like if that's true, and that's how the epistemology practically works, as we go backwards in time, people's should have a broader and broader credulity, because so many things have not been ruled out. And so many things, there are so many things that don't have an empirical basis. Am I correct there, or am I missing something?
No, I would consider it to be the same. So like, for example, if we were living in the Roman Empire and somebody said, I saw an elephant or something, and no one's ever heard of an elephant. Like, no one's seen this. There's only this one guy who's traveling the world who said he's seen an elephant. We should not believe him. We should not believe his testimony of an elephant. We should wait until there's like testable predictions where someone has gone over there and conquered some, brought some back, or we have gone and saw some and brought like parts of it back, or bones, or some empirical evidence that can be verified repeatably, future testable prediction kind of things. Until we have that, we should not believe the testimony of this guy that he saw this thing that we've never had any cognitive recognition of at all. So I would apply it the same across time.
Okay, and you would say he should be agnostic about elephants,
Yes,
or
I guess so.
yeah. It's not that he's being skeptical. Okay, uh, it it seems to me. Would you say that for most of human history that would be the most evolutionary beneficial epistemology to hold?
No, absolutely not. Evolutionary
Okay.
beneficial is a completely separate topic.
Right. Well, yeah, I am interested at this point in practicality, because I think I really like philosophy, but most people have this instinctive epistemology that they haven't worked out with the rigor that you have, or that even this conversation that we're having. So to me, what is, and maybe this is completely squirrely, but what is rational to believe for the average person, and what is rational to believe by your rigorous epistemology, are not the same thing.
Oh, right, absolutely. There was an argument by Alvin Plantinga, the evolutionary argument against naturalism, where he said evolution selects for survivability, not truth. And so based on what we should do, for what evolution tells us we should do, is just the things that'll lead to our survival, regardless of whether or not they're true. Whereas my epistemology is trying to give us to truth. So they have two different goals, and so they wouldn't be applicable towards the same ends.
Yeah. Well, would you say your epistemology is trying to get to truth, or to justified or knowledge?
Well,
Because something
knowledge
can
is
be.
just an idea in our head that is true. So it's something in our head that corresponds to reality.
Yeah, but there are so many potentially true things that your epistemology would rule out.
Right, because if it's for it to be knowledge, it has to get into our minds, and then it has to be differentiated between the imaginary and does it actually exist.
Right. That's why I would say, yeah, it seems like, yeah.
You're right. It would be
We're-
justified truth, but I have issues with that because of the Gettier problem. So,
oh,
but
I
we'll just
don't
go with
even know what that is. But we're making good time here. Do you have? I'd like to switch to morality, because I think those were my main questions. Unless you want to ask me some questions about my thinking on it, but
on morality or my epistemology.
no. If you wanted to throw anything out in the epistemology conversation, I think I understand. I understand it better now. I think you answered my questions.
Oh, great. Yeah, we can go to morality, and then we can. I'll ask some questions at the end.
Sure. Okay. So, yeah, why don't you walk me through your morality, your model for morality, and I'll ask some questions.
All right. Again, the short version is we have moral intuition, and we see what we experience as moral progress. This is terrible evidence, but it is a phenomenon. And I'm going to try and write a principle to describe this phenomenon. It's kind of like what Newton did when he wrote F equals ma in Newtonian mechanics. There was this phenomenon of gravity. He didn't know what it was. He's just going to describe some principles to try and describe it. And now, of course, he got it wrong because of general relativity, but he tried to describe it with the best principles he could, and I'm doing the same thing. So we have this experience of moral intuition and moral progress, and I'm going to try and describe those using principles. And then I go into what do we generally agree upon to be moral values, and freedom is one that we usually generally agree upon. It's one of the ones listed in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on morality and metaethics. And so I go with freedom, and I describe all the different certain classes of actions that it's good to help someone, it's bad to harm someone, it's good to be selfless, all these kinds of things, and generalize from that the principle that it's always good to help someone achieve their will, and it's always bad to involuntarily impose on someone's will. And using this, we can plot that out on a line that matches the moral progress and moral intuitions, and we can follow that line to the end of an extreme, which is like the best of all possible worlds, which is a universe where it is impossible to have any involuntary imposition of will. Everything is voluntary. No one can force you to do something you do not consent to doing. And that's the best of all possible worlds. And it's kind of like, it doesn't actually exist. It's just an abstract idea, kind of like a triangle, a perfect triangle. It is impossible for us to draw a perfect triangle in our world, because if you tried, you could zoom in with a microscope and you'd realize the electrons go in little bubble shapes. So it's literally impossible to draw a perfectly straight line. So it's impossible to draw a perfect triangle. But we can use the abstract idea to get as close as possible given our pragmatic limitations. And likewise, we can use the abstract idea of the best of all possible worlds as a guide to get as close as possible given the pragmatic limitations we have in our world.
Yeah. Yeah, I especially like the idea of having an abstract ideal. We can get to an abstract ideal, and then that abstract ideal becomes the objective standard. I really appreciate that. I think that's brilliant. The involuntary imposition of will, that seems to be the axiom that everything hangs on. Is that right?
Yeah, that is the principle I'm using to try and describe morality. So that's my principle, kind of like Newton's F equals ma. It's just a general impression given the best I can to come up with a principle that describes this phenomenon to the best of my ability.
Right, right. Okay. And I think that's the place where people are going to disagree with you is basically that axiom. People are going to have other standards that they like better or worse. Now I know I heard you talk about a little bit about this before, but so you would say like parenting and disciplining children would be immoral but justified. Is that right? According to your axiom?
That's correct. If we lived in the best of all possible worlds, then disciplining a child would be an immoral because there's no justification for it. It's just an involuntary imposition on the child doesn't do anything to benefit them in any way. So it's purely just an immoral act if we lived in the best of all possible worlds. Clearly we don't. So it's objectively immoral if we're comparing it to the standard of the best of all possible worlds. And if we could, once we reach the technological point where it's no longer necessary to discipline children, then we should stop doing so because it is immoral. But it's justified in the context of the world we live in, and so it's pragmatically useful that we should do so.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that's the sticky point for me, because it seems like the idea of involuntary imposition of will being always bad means that authority, any kind of authority, is always immoral, but may be justified. Would you agree with that?
Any kind of authority that is not voluntarily consented to. So if I consent to your authority and choose to listen to your dictates, then that's totally moral. That's totally fine. But if you are imposing them on me against my will, that is always immoral.
Yeah, even if you're yanking somebody out of the way of an oncoming bus.
Right. So that's only pragmatic. That only applies to our current limitation. If you yank someone out of the way in the best of all possible worlds, it would always be immoral. Because it's their world. If they want the bus to come and hit them, that's their choice, and you're forcing them to do something against their will. So there would be no pragmatic justification to force them to do anything in the best of all possible worlds ever. It's not. There's no way to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and there's something I'm reaching for here, but it might I might have to just kind of go with more directly what I'm thinking within a Christian worldview. I think ultimately God's authority is a good thing, and the best of all possible worlds is when we willingly choose to submit to God's authority, and that would be good. And for those who do not, because God's authority is ultimately good, then the best thing for God to do is to make people. I'm trying to think of, like, his imposition of will would be a good thing because it ultimately brings people into what they were created to be. And so I think that's where I would disagree. I would never be able to say involuntary imposition of will is always bad. Although I obviously do think, God is working maximally to maximize people's desire to come to him. That was too much, but I don't know. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So my response would be is that if someone is created for a purpose that they didn't voluntarily choose for, that is the definition of slavery and immediately immoral. So
Right.
I would immediately dismiss that kind of worldview.
Right. Whereas if I would say by God's nature, being all-knowing, all powerful, all good, he is such a higher order of being that it's his right to create beings that don't choose their own purpose.
Right, and I would call that just immediately slavery, and by definition wrong. So that is just the definition of immoral by my definition. And most people intuitively seem to agree that if there is some being that created you for a purpose you have no choice in, and you are obligated to abide by this purpose that you had no say in, that is just by definition slavery and by definition immoral.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think that is where but you do find that people intuitively agree with you?
Yes, pretty much universally, without the only exceptions being people who believe in a God because of their, I would say because they have an emotional connection to this, and so they have a rationalization to fit that emotional need, but it's not really cognitively meaningful. Most people usually agree, yeah, that's bad. It would be better if you had the choice. Like if God created you and said, well, you can choose to follow me or you can choose to go to your own world, that would be a morally superior option just in every possible case.
Right. What about potential? Like Jeffrey Dahmer, let's say we gave him his own world where he can do what he wants. And you would say that's not immoral at all. As long as there's no imposition of will, that's not immoral at all for him to, do his heinous acts.
Right. So like if he lived in a video game, he could do anything he wanted to, because there's nothing immoral that can be done to artificial intelligence who either who consent or don't have consciousness or any way. So there's no harm in giving him a free reign to do anything he wants in a video game. Would you agree with that?
Well, no. See, that's the interesting part, because I would say Jeffrey Dahmer's desires are perverse, and that as it's a harm, he's harming his own human dignity or human value by wasting the potential of his life. Does that make sense?
Well, a couple things there. One is, I would definitely disagree there. I'd say that he should have the right to choose for himself. He should have his own freedom to choose. And if you were forcing your ideas onto him against his will, again, that would be by definition slavery, by definition immoral. So I would say that a morally superior world would be, he can go to his own universe, do whatever he wants, as long as it doesn't impose on will. That is a morally superior way the world could be than forcing him to do something against his will or against his consent. That would be slavery.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I think what we're running into here is like a difference in like values that you may call them moral or immoral, but like oughts and so on. That it's so. Oh shoot! I lost the next question I was going to ask you. Yeah. So let's say you would say the broad range of choices. Somebody who chooses to, watch pornography and masturbate all day versus somebody who chooses a world in which they are being beneficial to the poor. There is no moral difference between those two people.
If we lived in the best of all possible worlds, no.
Right.
Because every single individual can choose to go to their own universe and do whatever they want. So there is no moral benefit, no potential to help anyone, because they're already doing whatever they want. They already have their own universe. And so it would only be morally beneficial if you chose to live in a world where everyone was limited in some way and you volunteered your time to help them. But it would be morally superior, again, if they could just go to their own universe, do whatever they want. So the pragmatic limitations of our world, where it's beneficial to help people because of the limitations of nature imposes on us, don't apply to the best of all possible worlds, because there are no limitations. You can have your own universe. So there would be no, it would be morally superior to give the person free reign to go to their universe and masturbate or whatever and do whatever they wanted to, rather than to force them or to impose on their freedom to try and get them to live a certain way that someone else deems correct.
Right. Okay. So you've got kind of this objective morality, but it seems like there is no objective purpose for or necessarily objective values apart from that single axiom. Is that?
Yeah. Yeah, that is the value. That is the purpose, is that every individual should have the freedom, sovereignty over themselves to decide for themselves what they want their purpose and their values to be.
Right. So humanity's purpose, or any individual purpose, would be to do whatever you want.
Right. I'd say for any conscious being, whether it's humanity or animals or aliens or anything, or God, God would apply to this just as well.
That they should be able to do whatever they want. Yeah. So, and those are the things that I'm not sure people would intuitively agree with. Because I think you have to, like, I think everybody, from a human perspective of like what I want for my life and what you want for yours, no involuntary imposition of will sounds really good, but then no objective purpose or value to life apart from that sounds kind of bad.
Well, you can give yourself a purpose, and then it becomes an objective value and purpose for you. So
Right.
it's immediately elevated to that status.
Yeah.
It just doesn't apply to anybody else, but it's still objective for you.
Okay. It's objective for me in this. Yes, individually objective in the sense that it's my subjective ideal.
Right. And that is equivalent to an objective morality that applies to everyone because it applies to your universe and yourself.
Okay. Yeah, I understand. Another practical question that's a little different. Is it moral to have kids in your morality because they did not choose to be born?
It kind of depends. So like
Okay.
antinatalism,
Yeah.
it would be I would consider it immoral for a god to like put a soul into a living being and force them into a world where they are this limited against their will. That would definitely be immoral. Now, we don't actually have that power. We can't we don't have the option of giving someone their own universe where they're completely free to do whatever they want. We only have one option, which is to procreate in this world. So it's immoral for biology to force us into this world and to confine us. It is immoral for a god to force us into this world and confine us. But it isn't immoral for us to interact in this world that we already exist in.
Okay, that I think I understood what you said, but I still don't understand. I don't know if I have the answer. Like, because a non-existent soul, let's say, or soul, whatever. Somebody doesn't exist yet. They don't have the choice whether or not they get to exist. Two other human beings are making that choice for them.
Oh, well, that's what I'm rejecting. We don't actually make that choice. That's a choice of biology or a choice by God. All we're doing is physically interacting with stuff. We should have the freedom to physically interact with stuff in any way we want. And the consequences of those are involuntary impositions on us by nature. So nature is the one that's immoral in this context, not the people who are having sex.
Oh, interesting. No, okay. You're going to have to help me understand that. Because two people who are intentionally having a child, it is their will and intention to reproduce. That does seem to be a choice to bring someone into a conscious choice to bring someone into the world who may or may not want to exist.
Right. So it's like if we lived in the best of all possible worlds and you wanted to bring someone into existence, essentially you could potentially create someone, but they would have to immediately have their own universe. And then they would have the choice to do whatever they wanted in that universe. And I would not consider it to be immoral to simply just create another person or another being in some way. I would not consider that to be immoral in and of itself. The immorality comes in is when you impose involuntary limitations on that will. So the creation of the individual is not immoral, but it's the imposition of the restrictions on that will that's immoral. And so the creation part of the parents is not immoral in and of itself. It's the restrictions placed on that by nature that is immoral.
Yes. Oh, I think I understand what you're saying. And it sounds like in the best of all possible worlds, the person who comes into existence could immediately choose to not exist.
Yep, they could do that.
Okay. And then it sounds like, it seems like there's this tricky line between you're saying the reproduction by the parents is not immoral, but then the limitations that nature imposes are immoral. But by that standard, it still seems like what the parents are doing may not be good because they are knowingly putting someone into these limitations.
Well, again, I would say that the immorality is done. It's like the trolley problem. Are you familiar with the trolley problem?
Nope. You maybe, and you'll remind me, but I don't think so.
All right, never mind. So again, I would say creation of a being isn't immoral, but the involuntary impositions imposed on it are immoral. Now, we don't have the option to give someone their own universe. We only have the option to procreate in this universe. So you could consider it to be a justified immoral action, kind of like disciplining a child. Because we don't have the pragmatic option to give them their own universe and total freedom. We only have the option to put them in this very fallen world.
Okay.
So it would be more like killing animals to eat meat. It would be objectively immoral, possibly, because you're imposing involuntary impositions on will. But it wouldn't, just the creation of a being, I would not consider that immoral. But the creation of a being who you know is going to have be forced against their will to live in this kind of a world and have experienced suffering, that could potentially be considered to be immoral. But I don't really take a position on antinatalism, so it could go either way.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. I think I have more questions about pessimistic philosophy, but maybe we'll get to those later. This is more of a thought experiment based on your model of morality. Well, let's go to the killing animals one real quick. How is killing an animal for meat justified?
Because if we don't kill them, we die. It's still immoral. It's still objectively immoral. It's just like any other, like disciplining children is also immoral because it's an involuntary imposition on their will, but it's justified because we need to do it to make them, to prevent a greater imposition on their will, which is
Right.
if they go into the street, they're going to get hit by a car. The similar thing applies to killing animals. Like if we don't kill the animals, there is a greater imposition on our will. On us, we die. So we kind of have to unilaterally overwrite their freedom and kill them, which is totally immoral to save ourselves. So it's justified in that sense. Though I personally would not consider humans better than the other animals. I consider them equal. So it's equally wrong to kill an animal as to kill a human, essentially, in general. So I definitely, it's only justified because we have to do it.
Right. Well, but that's the thing is we all kill animals and eat food, even though we're eat meat. Well, maybe you don't. Maybe you're a vegan, but most of us do when it's not necessary for us to survive. We just like the taste of meat. Would that be unjustified?
I would consider it unjustified, yes.
Oh, okay. Are you a vegetarian?
No, I'm not. I'm just an immoral person who likes meat cheeseburgers.
Fair enough. No, well, that I appreciate that because that's kind of one of those things. I guess that leads me to a more personal question. So, are these more like fun thought experiments for you, or are you like, do you feel like this is the most viable, practical, objective morality?
Well, I would definitely consider it the most viable objective morality, but it applies in stages. So we are nowhere near the best of all possible worlds. We can only make small incremental changes at a time. So like gay rights, women's rights, those are great changes. Eliminating slavery, those are great changes we can make. But eliminating the eating of meat, that's a little more difficult given our pragmatic limitations. Not disciplining children, a lot more difficult given our pragmatic limitations. So we aren't at the stage where we can eliminate those yet. So it isn't an imperative for us to do so. We have other things we can make progress on first. And until we get to the technological point where those are completely unnecessary, then it's essentially just a justified immoral action that we have to live with.
Okay, interesting. It seems like there would be so much practical benefit to your model of morality if you did put a higher value on sentient beings. Why not do that?
What do you mean? Because by sentient, do you mean not?
Sorry, prioritizing a human, self-aware experience over like animal experience, which maybe there is some degree of self-awareness, but
right, I would definitely not do that. I would consider all conscious things should be considered equally moral agents or have moral value. So everything that is conscious should essentially get its own universe and do whatever it wants with it. The fact that we prioritize humans more than other things is purely a pragmatic thing based on our limitations because we are humans. It's not a moral thing. It's a immoral, selfish thing.
Right. I just think that leads to all kinds of it seems like that leads to all kinds of oughts, like moral imperatives that we either can't or are not willing to go down that road. I mean, we would all have to become like in the best of all possible worlds within these limitations. We would all have to become PETA advocates and vegans.
Well, again, that's where the pragmatic part applies, because the best of all possible worlds is very, very, very far away. So using my objective morality would only state that we should make progress as we can given our pragmatic limitations. So as we make progress technologically, then those things will become less and less justified to do. But many of those things are at the point where it's completely justified and it's not even worth our concern. So my objective morality would not ask us all to become vegetarians tomorrow. It's like, don't care. It's all justified right now until we have the technological capability like in Star Trek or food synthesizers. If we have food synthesizers, we can just press a button and get the food and feed everyone on the planet this way. There is zero justification to kill animals. Like, that will just be immediately immoral. And I'd consider it to be like gay rights or women's rights, where we just get to the point as a culture where like we see that as so immoral that we're just going to stop doing it. It's going to be the moral progress thing where we essentially agree, yeah, we shouldn't do that anymore. We don't need to. Killing animals is wrong, and we're going to stop doing it. And at that point, I'm pretty sure most of society is going to agree that that's immoral. Just like we normally experience moral progress when we gain a certain technological advancement, we start to see imposing limitations on people as less justified. And I think the same will apply to killing animals once we gain the technological capabilities to no longer need to do so.
Okay. I think I get most of that. By pragmatic, though, like, are you just saying it's too hard for all of us to become vegetarians and PETA advocates today? Is that
yes?
That it's just
it's still immoral. It's just a justified immoral action, but it's just too hard.
It's just too hard right now. Okay, all right, that makes sense. Okay, well, I think that exhausts my my questions about your morality. I do have two more topics I wanted to ask you some questions about.
Sure, go for it.
So maybe we'll get to pessimistic philosophy at the end, but there are some arguments for the, you've knocked down, I think, most of the popular, if not all of the most popular arguments for theism. And I think you've done a really good job with it. But for some reason, there are three like popular philosophical arguments for God being a mind that I have not seen anybody ask you about. And I think I can anticipate your responses to some of them, but I thought I might shoot them at you and see what you think.
Sure, go for it.
All right, so I'm going to have to look them up because I don't know them off the top of my head. But all right, so the first one is anything beyond space. These all tie to like cosmological arguments. So the first one would be anything beyond space-time has to be immaterial. The only immaterial things we know of are minds and abstract concepts like numbers. Abstract concepts like numbers cannot be causes. Therefore, it's most plausible that an immaterial mind is the first cause.
Right, that is William Lane Craig's cosmological, Kalam cosmological expansion. So
right, he tags it on, yep.
So my response to that is that no, it doesn't. First thing, we can have immaterial, spaceless, timeless things that are still natural. For example, Nima Arkani Hamad presented a theory of emergent space-time where space-time and all of the matter in it emerge from some more fundamental natural property. So yes, we can have those things, immaterial, spaceless, timeless things, which are not a mind and are purely natural. He's an atheist, so he doesn't believe these are conscious in any way.
Right. Now, so you would cite that as, are you citing that as the most plausible explanation or just evidence that there could be another explanation?
Right, it could be another explanation. So the first premise, or I think it was the second premise, is immediately false, where it says only minds and abstract objects can exist with immaterial things. That's immediately false. I can just say, nope, this disproves that statement. Your argument is false. Now, I would go a step further and say this is not only a disproof, but it's a better explanation because it has a basis in physics, whereas all this mind stuff has no basis in physics.
Yeah, the mind, right. Okay, I guess my question, though, was, do you think the Ahmad's emergent space-time theory is... would you say that's the most plausible explanation right now?
The origin of space, I have no idea. Right.
But it seems like
whatever physics, like it could be the multiverse, the cyclic universe, the imaginary time, other dimensions of time, two-time physics, the end of time, Julian Barber. That's a science question. I have no idea about quantum physics, about what is the best explanation of space-time. Like, no idea.
Right, but
I would definitely tend to say it's more of a naturalistic explanation. It's a better explanation than a mind or a supernatural explanation because we have evidence of natural things. And so just based on induction, I'd probably continue it and say it's probably more natural things.
Got it. So it's kind of like the 2 pounds in the box. You're going to say, no, that's not the most plausible explanation because there are so many other available explanations that seem more plausible or equally plausible.
Right. So I'd use that to counter the argument, but then I would go further and say the natural explanations are actually more supported because of induction.
Got it. Okay. All right. The next one is not from William Lane Craig. This one's from Swinburne. So you might have to help me out, but it's So he argues that basically saying a law is eternal seems like the same thing as saying that there's brute contingency, that agent causation. See, this is my severe boiling down of Swinburne, because I don't want to. I'll butcher it if I try to retell it without just reading it. But he's saying agent causation seems more likely because it seems more likely than brute contingency.
Does he put that in the form of a syllogism that you could read, or is it just a paragraph thing?
It's just a paragraph, but I could read it if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, there are two types of causal explanations: scientific explanations in terms of laws and initial conditions, and personal explanations in terms of agents and their volitions. For example, if I come into the kitchen and find the kettle boiling, and I ask Jan, why is the kettle boiling? She might answer, the heat of the flame is being conducted via the copper bottom of the kettle to the water, increasing the kinetic energy of the water molecules such that they vibrate so violently that they break the surface tension of the water and are thrown off in the form of steam. Or she might say, I put it on to make a cup of tea. Would you like some? The first provides a scientific explanation, the second a personal explanation. Each is a perfectly legitimate form of explanation. Indeed, in certain contexts, it would be wholly inappropriate to give one rather than the other. Now, a first state of the universe cannot have a scientific explanation since there is nothing before it, and therefore it cannot be accounted for in terms of laws operating on initial conditions. It can only be accounted for in terms of an agent and his volitions, a personal explanation.
So
go ahead.
Okay, so I would reject the first thing he says. There's two kinds of causation. I say that presumes that there is something to cause something else. So he's skipped the metaphysical question. So there has to be some metaphysical thing to cause something. Now I can grant that, and I can say that that metaphysical thing can be purely natural. So you don't need the agent causation to act as the cause. You can have a natural causation. So I reject his first premise.
Okay, is his first premise is that there's two kinds of causal explanations.
Right. But to have a causal explanation, you have to have a cause. It's the same thing as like there has to be a first cause. There has to be a first mover. In order to have causal explanations, you have to first have a cause. And
right.
So the prerequisite to that cause could be a natural thing. Instead of it just being a mind, it could be a natural thing. So I'm saying his explanation is false.
Okay. All right. Well, I cannot argue Swinburne's case for him, partly because I don't understand it as well, and also because I don't find it at all convincing myself. So it's one of those philosophical things where it boils down to one philosopher saying, yes, there is, and the other saying, no, there isn't. So.
Well, yeah. So my approach to Swinburne, because I've actually talked with Swinburne. So.
Oh, great.
Because I'm asserting that natural things can have godlike properties, like eternal and all-powerful and necessary. So there's like a pantheism instead of a theism.
Right.
That thing can act as the natural cause. So his first premise, where he says there's two kinds of causation, it can't be natural causation, I just immediately reject that. It says yes, it can be natural causation. Here's an eternal, all-powerful, natural thing that can do it.
Yeah, I got it. That makes sense to me, and it would have been great if you had recorded your conversation with Swinburne. That would have been
awesome.
It's
an email, so.
Okay. Well, maybe in your book. All right. So this is me boiling down Craig, and I don't know if Craig got this one from someone else. But this one says the universe is a temporal effect from a timeless cause. In every case we can think of, in order for an effect to be eternal, the cause must be eternal. So he would say, for example, this water is frozen, and it's going to stay frozen as long as the temperature is below freezing. But if that cause does not remain, then the water will thaw. So he's going to argue the best explanation is agent causation, because an eternal agent can choose to create a temporal effect, whereas an eternal agent, whereas a natural agent is going to create a natural eternal agent will create an eternal effect.
What? Can you say that again?
Yeah. So the eternal natural agent will, based on everything else that we know, will create an eternal effect. The eternal cause will create an eternal effect. So it doesn't make sense to have an eternal cause create a temporal effect. So he would argue the way this makes sense is we can say, well, there's an agent that has a volition to create a temporal effect.
Well, the universe is eternal. So if there was an eternal natural thing like pantheism, it created our universe from some finite point in time, but this thing is now eternal. It's now going on forever.
Yes. So you would say, okay, but he cites scientific consensus to say the universe is not eternal.
Our observable universe is not eternal. That does not apply to all natural things. Like there's the multiverse theory, which is eternal. There's the cyclic universe theory, which is eternal. There's the string theory, which is eternal. Like all of the pre-Big Bang theories usually entail an eternal kind of concept. Our universe and our space-time definitely had a beginning, but that does not apply to all universes and all space-time.
Got it. It's interesting because I think he would cite scientific consensus, and you're saying are you saying scientific consensus is in the opposite direction, or are you saying that it's just these other explanations are equally or more plausible?
You're equivocating between the scientific consensus of our universe having a beginning and all natural things having a beginning. The scientific consensus does not say all natural things have a beginning. No one agrees with that statement. It is purely that our known universe and our known laws of physics had a beginning, and the universe came about to operate under the current laws of physics that we know at some finite point in the past, but that has absolutely nothing to do and says absolutely nothing about a finite beginning of absolutely everything. It's just absolutely everything we currently know about. That's it.
Okay, interesting. So either Craig misunderstands that or he's equivocating.
Yes. Yes, both.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I like Craig a lot. But I don't find him very convincing. Well, I find him convincing in the sense that he projects a ton of confidence, and so I think that makes people feel good. Yeah. Okay. Well, that does raise one more question. Do you think multiverse theory and string theory, do you find them ad hoc?
No, those actually were not. Like, there's a common claim that the multiverse came about in order to explain fine-tuning, to try and exclude a god. That's totally false. The multiverse came about as a combination of physics principles and particles that were just, because what physicists do is they take the known principles, particles, and laws in physics, and they combine them in different ways like Lego pieces to build models of the world. The multiverse is a combination of vacuum states and early universe inflation. The math and the math laws and equations used in those things, when combined together, create the multiverse theory. So it's not ad hoc at all. It's purely a natural physics explanation, just like any other physics explanation. There's just no way to verify it.
Okay. Interesting. There's no way to verify it. Okay. All right. It was interesting because the way you've described a lot of other things is ad hoc, and I am quickly going to drown if I try to get into physics. But it seemed to me, I hadn't heard the whole like, oh, they came up with this to try to explain fine tuning. It just seems like an unverifiable something unverifiable that is useful as an explanation.
Well, that's kind of how all physics starts. Like the Higgs particle was essentially just an explanation, a mathematical process to try and describe things that were going on created by, forget his first name, Higgs, in like the 1990s. And then it was verified in 2013 with the Large Hadron Collider. So we didn't actually have any way to verify it until like 2013, even though it pre-existed in the form of a mathematical equation. So pretty much everything in physics works like that.
Right. Okay. So if it's a philosophical argument, though, it would seem ad hoc to you. Is that like so philosophical arguments that are not verifiable but are useful as explanations? It seems like you would say those are ad hoc, but the scientific explanations, because there's some sort of use or evidence to them, you would not consider them ad hoc?
I don't consider things ad hoc purely because they're philosophical.
Well, no, I'm just saying because the idea that this is created solely for the purpose of explaining something, of explaining a problem. Is that not how you're using ad hoc?
Well, no, ad hoc would be something like new things added to a theory to explain away inconsistencies.
Oh, okay.
So just trying to explain something we don't understand yet, that's not ad hoc. That's what we have to do. That's science.
Right, but it's just after the okay.
So like if you made a testable prediction, the testable prediction was false, then you say, well, I can add this new thing to my theory to make it not false. That would be ad hoc.
Right, unless the new thing worked in some way.
Right. It would, if you could actually make a new testable prediction with this new thing and that thing turned out to be correct, then that would be supported. But it would be ad hoc prior to that.
Prior to that. Gotcha. Yep. Okay. Great. Well, that answers my questions about the mind arguments. Do you want to move on to pessimistic philosophy, or?
Sure. Keep going.
Yeah. So I'm really interested in kind of pessimistic philosophy. Have you heard of like David Benatar's asymmetry argument? So the idea is, and these are all like practical philosophical stuff, and but the idea is that regardless of most ways of measuring happiness or fulfillment in human beings, existence seems to be objectively imbalanced of bad things over good things. So whether you measure it in pain and pleasure, whether that's emotional pain and pleasure or physical, there seems like there's way more pain than pleasure, and that the quality of the pain is much greater than the quality of pleasure available. For instance, if we offer somebody, hey, in exchange for 2 to 3 minutes of the worst physical pain ever, we'll give you 2 to 3 minutes of the best physical pleasure ever, almost everybody's going to say, no, I won't take that deal. Similarly, with if you measure happiness in fulfilled desires, most of most people's desires are never fulfilled, and even if they are fulfilled, they're only fulfilled for a very short amount of time. So this would seem to suggest that existence is objectively bad for human beings, and that there's lots of all kinds of interesting implications from that. But I was wondering what you would think about that. Because I think this gets to, when we get to reasons to live, I start to think some kind of faith is necessary. So,
yeah, I definitely agree. I definitely think the suffering in the world completely outweighs the goodness.
Okay.
How would that lead into your question about faith?
Right. Well, okay. So what reasons are there to continue to exist? And what reasons are there to bring new beings into existence? If that is true, if existence is objectively an imbalance of bad things.
Well, I want to live and I want good things, so I'm going to continue to strive for them. So that's a reason to live for me.
Yeah, just the innate desire.
Yes.
Okay. Is that desire rational though?
No, it's just a desire.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And there's this irrational desire to live, and because you have it and because it's strong, you're going to keep living. Would that impact then your personal thoughts about having children if you knowing this is the case?
Well, again, I don't take a position on the antinatalism. I don't really know how I feel about that. So I remain agnostic on the question.
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, are you agnostic because you personally haven't thought it through and not sure how you feel about it? Or are you agnostic because you're not sure the conclusions lead there soundly?
I just haven't thought about it enough. I haven't taken the time to really consider the antinatalism position and whether or not bringing children into the world is good or bad, and whether or not how it applies to my morality, and whether or not it fits into a justified immoral action, or whether or not it's unjustified. I haven't really processed through that. I haven't taken the time to consider the antinatalism position seriously enough to really know.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. And then antinatalism eventually leads to can eventually lead to this idea that it would be better for the human race to go extinct, seeing as all of our existences are this great imbalance of bad things over good things. Now, obviously, I don't believe any of these things, but the only reasons I have to not believe them are faith reasons. So
can you give me an example of one of the things that you say you don't believe, and the only reason to not believe it is faith or something like that?
Yeah. I believe existence is worth living, and that it's worth living because of kind of a metaphysical reason. The idea that life intrinsically has meaning that outweighs the suffering, and that this meaning has this value to it that tips the scale. or that, in the same way that having children is a good thing. Although I do think we need to take the more serious thought about it. But that actually having kids is a moral action because new human beings is a good thing, and I don't have a logical rationale for why I can demonstrate that that's true.
Right, I would actually agree, but I'd go a little bit further and say anybody can make up a metaphysical explanation to justify anything they want. So we can say there's this undiscovered law of nature, and it gives us moral reasons and moral purpose and moral value, and it makes this objectively right to continue living and objectively right to have children and all these things. I don't think there's any justification for any of those. I think they're just purely ad hoc assertions. So I'd say those kinds of assertions are equally as justified as yours. And if we wanted that kind of thing, we could just assert the naturalistic antithesis of your explanation.
I have to think about that more, but I think I agree with you.
So just to clarify a little bit, because you said the only reason to do this is because of faith.
Faith reasons, yeah.
So I would definitely include that as a faith reason, and I would agree with you in that respect. It would just be faith
gotcha.
the opposite direction.
Yeah. Faith in some sort of naturalistic reason.
Yeah.
Right. I would agree with you. It's just that based on your epistemology and your worldview, it doesn't. Would you have access to faith, to that kind of faith?
No, I'd say that we have equally as little access to this naturalistic kind of metaphysical value as we have to a God kind of metaphysical value. I'd say we have valued it in neither, or access to neither.
Yeah, and it seems human beings need these reasons to exist. There's it seems like based on psychological studies, people have an irrational optimism. They always think, or almost all of them think their lives are better than they really are. They think that they're getting more of what they want than they really do. In fact, the people who test objectively rational suffer from mild depression or worse.
That's correct. That's correct. Then actually, the smarter you are, the less happy you are, and lots and lots of studies show all kinds of stuff like that. Yeah,
right.
But I would say that's again just purely a product of evolution. And we don't need these metaphysical kind of beliefs of absolute purpose and value, because throughout most of humanity we never had those. Most religion was, from my perspective, an invented thing at some point at the 150,000 year mark on human history. So they existed for 100,000 years with absolutely no idea of objective value or purpose. They just couldn't even conceive of it. Animals don't have that, and they live just fine.
You're saying before self-awareness, or
or religion, because I think we had self-awareness before religion.
Before religion, right? And I think I don't have all my thoughts on that fully worked out, but my guess would be that they came at the same time.
Here's a question: animals can live without that sense of objective value and purpose, can't they?
Yes, I think that animals don't have. Do animals have the capacity to question it? Do animals have the capacity to do the math and realize it's not worth it anymore? Goodbye, cruel world.
I don't think so, but I would say that the same thing applies to humans, because there are countries with majority atheists and they don't have a massive suicide problem.
Yes, I agree with you that they don't have a mass, but I would say they don't, because they come up with their own kind of faith reasons to keep moving on, that whether it's based solely on the value of human experience or something. I do think they have those reasons. Would you argue that they don't?
Oh, I would totally agree. I just wouldn't think they have faith towards metaphysical reasons, like an objective value and objective purpose. Many of them can have subjective value and subjective purpose, and grant that there is no metaphysical absolute purpose, and go along just fine in life.
Yes. So it's it's a purpose that they would say, this is subjective to me, but I find it completely motivating, and so on. And it basically boils down to not having necessarily a rational justification.
Well, that's more of an emotional justification. So it's not. I wouldn't classify that as faith, because the faith thing would only be beliefs that we can't support with evidence. That would be a belief about a metaphysical super law of nature that gives us purpose, objective value and purpose, or a God that gives us objective value and purpose. I would say we need faith to believe in those things, but I don't think we need faith to believe in subjective value and purpose. It's just a feeling. It's not something that we believe actually exists.
Okay. Maybe we're using the term faith differently, or I'm using a broader word, or so somebody's saying, you know what, there is not like, let's say somebody does the math and says, existence is more suffering than good things, but I am intrinsically motivated. I want to continue living, and I am just going to choose to believe that my interactions with other human beings and my love for my kids makes it all worth it. You would say that's not a faith choice. That's just a practical, emotional choice.
Right. I just said it's an emotional choice. First, because for me, faith is like belief in something that you can't justify with evidence or rationality.
But they can't justify with evidence or rationality that their love for their kids is going to make their life worth it.
Well, they can justify that they have a feeling that gives them this desire.
I see. So they can say, yeah. I feel this way, and it makes me want to keep living, and that's good enough.
Right.
Okay. All right. That would not necessarily fit the data, but emotions don't have to be, your desires or emotions don't have to be rationally justified.
Well, right. There's no need for rational justification there. Like faith would be like making a claim that you can't justify. Like there is an objective value and purpose. If you're just making the claim that I have these feelings of objective value and purpose, that's totally justified. Like you can justify that purely by your experience and your feelings, but you don't need it to actually exist as some fundamental part of reality to make it a something that we act on, or a reason that we act and continue living in the world. It doesn't have to be rational, existing kind of thing. It can just be, I do it because I like it. That's the sufficient reason.
Yeah. Do you think most people do need something more objective attached to it, though?
No, I think that's purely a property of evolution. I think because of most human history, we never had that. It's just something that was invented by religious ideology, and we've adopted it because we like it. We like hierarchies, and so this is like the highest of all the hierarchies. And so intellectually, we like to attach to that kind of an ideal, but I don't think it's necessary at all.
But you would say it's evolutionarily beneficial, or it has been.
Yes, I would say it has been.
Gotcha.
I think one of the best positives about religion is that it has united people and given a lot of community and a lot of early education system. Like it convinced parents to teach their kids stuff and to give money to certain organizations for no other reason than just beliefs. That is a phenomenally impressive system to be able to accomplish that.
Yeah. Right. And in your kind of worldview, would you accomplish those things through teaching empathy?
Well, I don't know if the atheist worldview can provide that, because that's one of those things. There's like there needs to be some kind of an objective, metaphysical, top of the hierarchy kind of assertion there. And atheism says, well, we don't know anything like that. Like, what are you talking about? That's completely unsupported. We have no rational basis for any kinds of those kinds of claims. Now, we can make up claims. Of course, they're unsupported, so we could do it that way. But I don't think it's going to provide the same kind of feeling of authority that the claiming to have this absolute authority gives you.
Yeah. Yeah, I see. Interesting. Well, you've given me a lot to think about, and I think you answered all the questions that I had on my my list of things to talk to you about. So I'd be happy to answer some of yours, or if you want to. I've got another hour if we need to go that long. But
sure. Could you tell me a little bit about your worldview?
Yeah. So I am a Christian. Like I said, I don't think that apologetics works very well. But I do think that under a different, I obviously don't hold to your epistemology, but I think under a different epistemology, and one that's probably most used by human beings, it is rational to believe in God. Let's say this, it can be rational for any individual to believe in God. So I think the best reason to believe in God is because you've had a supernatural experience that convinces you, and continuing confirming experiences with the supernatural, and then that combines with, that could combine with all kinds of pragmatic benefits that are then similarly convincing and persist.
So how would you tell the difference between those experiences and just imaginary delusions or illusions or misconceptions or just brain electrical signals?
Yes. Fundamentally, I guess like you may not be able to. It depends on like what you believe is possible, right? But I would say most people have not experienced uh, delusion. Most people, some people clearly, but most people do not experience delusions that are that convincing on a regular basis, that are that pragmatically beneficial. Most people who experience delusions that strong find them greatly harmful to their lives. But you might disagree.
Right. So, like, here's one. If you do you have any objects near you? Like, touch your microphone. Is it a solid object?
Yes.
No, it's not. 99% of it is empty space between the electron and the proton. Didn't you just
Sure.
experience a delusion that was incredibly convincing?
Uh, well, I don't know. That seems like a definitions game. That what we just did there seems like a definitions game. But I'm like, I guess I am with you that my epistemology is built on assumptions and so on. I just think it's a much more practical and one that humans have that most people have. Like I think the aliens example you may have heard me give on Skylar Fiction's show. Uh, where did you hear me talk about that?
I don't remember.
So the idea being, let's say aliens came, this UFO came over your house and abducted you in the middle of the night, and you went up into their alien spaceship, and they zapped you with their laser, and you felt this euphoria and great feelings of love for humankind, and then you woke up in your bed the next morning, you're like, was that a dream? Did that really happen? But then you continue to receive visits and communications from these aliens, and then you meet other people who have had similar visits and communications with these aliens. I think most people would find it would be convinced that aliens exist and they communicate. Now, it's not going to convince me that that's what happened to you, but I would understand and I would consider it rational for you to be convinced if you really had those experiences.
I would not, because that's actually everything you just said is a really common description of what people who believe in aliens actually experience.
Right.
And so for me, it would be like if I see a unicorn or something, no matter how many times I see the unicorn, it's not reasonable to believe the unicorn exists until we can actually verify it with testable predictions and empirical methodologies and get other people to verify it with these future testable predictions, not just see it. So I would have a much stronger criteria on here. But go back to my original example. Like when we touch an object and we think it's solid object, it's not actually a solid object. And when we see color doesn't actually exist. That's just a product of how our brains interprets light waves. And if you touch a metal object and a plastic object in the same room, the metal object will feel colder, but they're both room temperature. So the way our brains work, it creates delusions, not exactly, because we use delusion to mean something a little bit stronger, but it creates these illusions of reality that aren't there. Like most of what our brains process of reality is completely an illusion. And we have lots of experiences of illusions all the time. When we look at optical illusions, we can't tell that they're optical illusions until you see like the after image of the like comparison thing. So why should we assume that this belief in this experience of a God isn't one of those illusions that we see, which are extremely common? The majority of our experience is illusory.
Yeah, and I think this is the difference between, say, the hardcore materialist and scientific mindset and the way most people operate. Because while I agree with you, the microphone is not, empirically it's solid, but experientially it is, and it makes practically, on all practical levels in daily life, it matters to me that it's solid, and it doesn't matter to me that it's not actually solid. And so it has to do with the consistency of human experience and the pragmatic benefits of living our lives with these things. And that then gets to like the whole, like what is true and the correspondence between reality and truth, which I'm kind of still wrestling with. But yeah, that was a lot.
So how would you say that the experience of a God is pragmatic? Because essentially your pragmatic experience of a God is only, you have these sensations about him, but it doesn't really, like a microphone, you use the microphone to do stuff.
Sure.
You can make future testable predictions with a microphone. How does that apply to the experiences of a God?
Right. So during like at my religious conversion, I think I had a legitimate personality change that persisted, and I think that that's borne out by psychological studies that people who have religious conversion is one of the few things that consistently results in major personality change that persists. I think it's religious conversion and psychedelic experiences are the two things that tend to consistently do that, and then it kind of those things can create a like when that happens, it's incredibly difficult to deny. Now, is it possible? Sure, but it's incredibly difficult to deny, and especially when it continues to be beneficial and life changing.
So if we found some neurological condition that can explain these exact things, would that decrease your certainty that that is a reliable or reasonable belief, justified belief?
Uh, it depends what you mean. Like just because we can look at the chemicals in the brain doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't something more going on behind that. So probably not. It depends on like what kind of thing you could show me.
So epileptics have everything you have
Yes.
a more likely experience of these supernatural things and are more likely to believe in a God and have consistent, reliable experiences of a God. And it's likely just a cause of the epilepsy. If you treat the epilepsy, the experiences go away. There's certain neurological correlates to why this occurs. There's the God helmet, which shows that supposedly can interact with this part of the brain, hypothetically. I mean, all of these things seem to be purely neurological based, and there doesn't seem to be, like my methodology, my epistemology starts with, we need some methodology to differentiate between imagination and experience.
Right.
Just an experience is just post hoc. You got to have these future prediction things that work independently of just, I saw this. And so do you have a similar kind of way to demonstrate that these experiences you're having of a God are not just imaginary when we have pretty good reason to believe it is just a function of the brain?
Yeah. So do I have a way of determining it?
You said it was a reasonable belief to believe in a God.
Yeah, I thought it was.
What?
Yeah, go ahead.
So to be reasonable, you would have to have some kind of methodology or some way to differentiate the two, wouldn't you?
Yes. And I'm probably operating. I know I'm operating on a less philosophically and scientifically robust worldview. I think most people, they do things like they wake up in the morning and they're like, did I really do that last night, or was that a dream? And then they use like practical methods to kind of orient themselves to whether or not an event actually happened. And so, if I sat down and thought about it, I could probably figure out how to best communicate what those things are. But it's the kind of normal stuff that people have been doing for centuries up until we now have the empirical methods that we do now.
Do you think there's a difference between the claims like having experience of a unicorn you see? That would be a different kind of a claim than saying there is an all-powerful being who created the universe or created me or something like that. The burden of proof for those two claims is sufficiently different because do you agree with the statement extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, something like that?
Probably, yes.
And so would you agree that the personal experience, which I agree personal experience is good evidence for some things, but to me it would not meet the burden of proof to justify an all-powerful being? You need something more for that.
Yeah, well, I think we're kind of... So I would say the person who has the personal experience is reasonable in being convinced. It's reasonable for them to be convinced by it. I don't think that they will be able to convince anybody else.
Right, I totally agree. I'm talking about just from your perspective. You've had these experiences of something, but as far as I know, I don't know any experience that can demonstrate all-powerful. Like if you like visited this being and you can see it create universe after universe after universe by snapping its fingers, that still doesn't imply it's all-powerful because you've just seen it do this finite number of things. So I don't know what kind of experience can ever justify the claim X is all-powerful or all-knowing or wasn't created by some greater thing or is eternal. All of those things seem to be outside of what experience can justify.
Yes. So those would be faith positions based on I've had this experience that seems supernatural, and then I choose to believe what that experience communicates to me, and then progressively, as we get farther away from that, the core of that experience, I become less and less certain of whatever it is that's involved in the religion.
All right, so you say that it's reasonable to believe that there is something that caused this experience, but the leap that it is like a being or an all-powerful creator, that's a faith not a reasonable or not a justified position as much as it is to just believe that there is something that caused this experience. Those are two different classes of things, right?
So I guess it depends on like what the claim is going with. So there's a lot of like practical steps that I think are reasonable for someone to make with these experiences. So like say, I had this experience, and in this experience with God, he told me that he loved me, and it's consistent with Jesus, and it's consistent with everything communicated about him in the Bible, and so therefore I'm going to put my trust that he is all-powerful, all-wise, all-knowing, and that seems to be confirmed by my experience, that this is my sense of who he is. Now, you might say, like, well, that's completely unreasonable. You need to just believe that it's an experience. But I would agree, within your epistemology, it probably does seem unreasonable. But I think the way most humans practically work with their epistemology, I think most human beings would be convinced.
And do you think the fact that most human beings would be convinced makes it reasonable?
Well, that's a good question. It depends on your definition. So I'm not entirely convinced that human beings are very reasonable, and if we go down that route, then no. If we hold up a different definition of what it means to be reasonable and justified, then sure, maybe I'm being unreasonable according to that definition.
All right. So could you tell me some more about your beliefs? Just go into it a little more in depth.
Yeah. So I believe Jesus Christ died on the cross for my sins and rose from the dead. That he personally communicated this to me, and his love to me changed my life completely. And since then, I've been following him and the Bible. I believe in miracles. I believe that God does answer prayer. If you ask specific questions, it will help me. But those are the core.
So what would it take to change your mind? What would it take to convince you that it wouldn't exist, or God does not exist, or Jesus didn't rise from the dead, those kinds of things?
Yeah. The street epistemology question. It would probably take a more powerful experience.
Could you describe to me what that would mean? Like what is a powerful experience, and what would be a more powerful experience? Is that just like an emotional thing?
It's difficult to imagine. No, it would have to not just be an emotional thing, but it would probably have to be like, yeah, it's difficult to imagine, but it would have to also result in great beneficial change in life and character.
Well, could you expand on your definition of what it means to have a powerful experience?
Yes. Emotionally, physically overwhelming. Yeah. Overwhelms the senses.
So an epileptic seizure, would that qualify as a powerful experience?
I've never had an epileptic seizure, so I don't know. Maybe.
That would be interesting. I'd like to hear if you do watch a documentary on what that is like, and then to hear your thoughts on whether or not that would qualify. I'd definitely be interested to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, and I know a little bit about Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky was epileptic, and I think it profoundly impacted his faith. So I'm not, like, people have similar experiences on psychedelics. I've never taken psychedelics. But I think, all of those things may access some area of consciousness that interacts with the supernatural or metaphysical, or however you want to put it. I'm kind of open to that. I think even watching a documentary on epilepsy, though, because I'm not experiencing it's really difficult. Like, whenever it's the difference between aliens. Like, somebody comes to me and has that testimony about aliens, I'm not going to believe them. But if I literally went through that, I would probably be convinced. And maybe that's not rational, but I think that is as rational as the next guy.
All right, I think I understand that a lot better now. I was asked in the comments to ask you the truth or drown question, a poof or drown
question. Yeah, is this Pine Creek asking questions in the?
Well, yeah, Pine Creek is here, but it was someone else who asked ask Pine Creek's question about proof or drown.
Right. Yeah, I can answer that on his show. But yeah, is the premise of the question that I have I'm with God like in heaven or whatever, and he's asking me to make this decision, but I have like all the limited knowledge and understanding that I currently have. Is that the premise?
It's like, yeah, if you're in heaven and God asks you, oh, these humans have done something terrible, and we have to punish them. We have two options. One, I can drown everyone and they can just suffer and drown under the pressure of the water and have it go into their lungs and experience all of this pain and suffering. All the babies will just experience this, or we can just poof them out of existence. And God asks you, what do you think we should do? And your answer is,
Yeah, based on my limited understanding and knowledge, I would say poof.
okay, sounds
Yeah.
good to me. I have no idea how Pine Creek would follow up with that.
Yeah. And I don't take that story in necessarily the literal fundamentalist way that other people take it. So, nor do I think most biblical scholars. But
That's interesting. You don't take a literal interpretation of the drowning, the Noah's Ark?
yeah, so I would say there are a lot of things I'm agnostic about, but I take a lot of the Bible at face value. But I believe it's inerrant in what it intends to teach, and so I'm okay with reading some things allegorically and so on. So I would say yes, there was a local flood. Did God do it in that way, or is that a shortcut explanation based on ancient Near Eastern belief? I'm kind of open to that.
Do you believe in a literal Adam and Eve?
I am not certain. I would say, yeah. So I'd say in face, I take a lot of things at face value. So what I would say is, was there a first human being who was conscious, and that's referred to in the Bible as Adam? Sure.
Interesting. And so, but you would definitely take the Jesus story literally.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I take. Well, it depends on how. Like the Book of Revelation, the whole thing is a visionary trance, so I wouldn't take that literally. But like all the Gospels, I would take literally. Yes.
Okay, cool. That definitely answers my question on those. That's all the questions I can think of for right now. That's pretty good. Yeah, I really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, I enjoyed talking with you too. You answered all my questions about your morality and epistemology. Maybe I'll think of more, but I really appreciated you taking the time to answer them, because I watched a lot of your videos and I was like, why doesn't anybody asking this? So I'm glad you cleared that stuff up for me.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer the questions, especially on YouTube conversation, because I can put it on my channel and say, here are the answers, because JR asked them.
There you go.
Awesome, right? I'm going to get back to cleaning up my basement because, oh God.
Yeah, good luck with that. I'm sorry to hear about that.
Yeah, no problem. All right. Thanks for coming on again. I will be happy to talk with you again sometime.
Yeah, if I think of more topics, I'd love to have a conversation. I like. Well, let me give you 60 seconds about my motivation. So, like I said, I think it's reasonable for me to believe in the experiences I've had, but I don't expect you to as an atheist. But my hope is that in conversations and in discussing truth and so on, that I can be some small part of people's experience with the supernatural, loving God that I do believe in. So that's my motivation.
I thought of another question.
Yes, sir.
People have experiences of other gods.
Mm-hmm.
What is your position on that? Are they reasonable to believe in the other gods?
Yes, I would say so. I would say, how would I put this? I would say I completely understand why. If you had that experience, now if somebody says, well, I was raised Muslim and I've always been Muslim, my parents were Muslim, I'd be like, nah, that's not a good reason. But if somebody said, I had this powerful experience with Allah, and it, I was on drugs and all this stuff, and it totally changed my life. And I would say, yeah, I think it's completely reasonable for you to believe, for you to be Muslim, and that I from my worldview, I think you probably did have some sort of supernatural experience.
So if personal experience can be used to justify many different mutually exclusive gods, doesn't that mean that personal experience as a methodology can't differentiate between reality and imagination? Because most of these are necessarily going to be imagination, because only one can be true, technically.
No. So I think he may have actually had a supernatural experience. Whether he interpreted it correctly or not, I would disagree with how he interpreted it and what happened. And I would say, he needs to continue to experience the truth. Yeah.
But can't he say the same thing about your experiences? And how can you tell that there's a substantive difference between those two things?
Yeah, he can. And so we would continue that conversation, and I would be happy to, share it with him, and he can share with me, and we'll see who, you know, who's we'll see where we go, is what I would say. But I feel like kind of the experience I've had is so convincing that I don't think I'm going to be persuaded by him.
Well, suppose he had an equally convincing experience.
It would only be convincing to him. It wouldn't
right.
be my experience.
So you would never be able to convince him, and he would never be able to convince you. And you'd both say you have this experience. One of you must necessarily be wrong because there can only be one God, essentially, based on their mutually exclusive propositions. And
yeah, go ahead.
So this methodology of I had an experience does not seem to be able to just to differentiate between reality and imagination. Now, if everyone only had experiences of one particular God and said like, yep, this is the one I experienced, this is the only one, and they all come to the same conclusion, then that may be a good argument. But the fact that we have experiences of many different gods, this methodology, this approach that you're using does not seem to be a justified indication that we can differentiate these things from just imaginary.
Yes. Well, I think there's a couple different things in there, and that, like I wouldn't say. So I would not say his experience is imaginary. I do believe in other supernatural beings and other supernatural experiences. So I would say he had a real experience. I think he interpreted it to the best that he knew how. If he had had a fuller experience, he would believe what I believe. And I'm going to try to, help him continue to experience the supernatural in a way where he receives a fuller revelation. Now, does that distinguish between reality and imagination? That's kind of where I think you kind of lost me there. I'm not arguing that this is a foolproof like epistemology. I'm just arguing that human beings being what they are, this is reasonable in that sense.
So it's only reasonable in the sense that it's how human brains work, and so because it's how human brains work, that it's reasonable for that reason?
It depends on what you mean by reasonable, but I would say yes, it's consistent with how, like, I think your epistemology is very rigid, robust, justified. I don't think hardly anybody orients themselves in the world that way.
And you think that the way they orient themselves in the world is reasonable by your definition?
I think it's reasonable by comparison.
So how would you respond to something like Plantinga's argument against evolutionary naturalism, that the way we orient ourselves in the world has no correspondence to truth?
I don't know. I don't know his argument. I don't know what I would say to that. I am not certain that truth and reality correspond one-to-one. So that's a question mark in my mind. So I'd have to look up Plantinga's argument and take a look at it. But yeah, I don't, unless you can tease it out for me, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm trying to put it in the context, because it's an argument specifically against evolution, but to try and put it in the context of your position, everything in the way our brains works has no necessary correlation to truth. Like, it could all just be purely based on survivability. So it has nothing to indicate truth at all. So we have no reason to believe that any of the experience we have, any of the feelings we have, any of the thoughts we have in any way correspond to what reality is really like. So that would mean that all of our experiences can just be false.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem here is that no matter what you do, based on how you acquire these beliefs, if it's just you have an experience of this God or an experience which you believe to be a God, and someone else has an experience they believe to be a God, and you say that their experience was not as strong as your experience or something, that seems to be purely based on a presupposition based on your experience. You don't have any way to assess the level or quality of their experience or the level of quality of your experience.
Correct.
So that doesn't seem to be a reasonable argument. It just seems to be a presupposition.
I understand what you're saying. Sure. I think, if you want to put it in those terms, then I would say like the way I view the world based on my experience, most people would be sympathetic to, even though those with, like robust and want to justify everything are not going to find it reasonable.
Okay, that makes sense.
Is that fair enough? Yeah.
Yep, fair enough. I think I understand more about your position now. So thanks for answering those questions for me.
Yes. And like I said, you're a heavyweight to me when it comes to philosophy. I dip my toes in here and there and like these conversations, but it's very possible that I said multiple foolish things, and I will, 5 years from now have learned some things that are completely different. But yeah.
Awesome. Thanks again for coming on. I really enjoyed talking with you. Pine Creek says that you can feel free to contact him. He'd be happy to have you on his show.
Okay. We'll figure that out. Yep. It was great. Thanks for having me on. I enjoyed the conversation very much. I'm a big fan, and maybe we'll talk again sometime.
Absolutely. I'll see you later.
Bye.